One of the most common misconceptions about American slavery is that enslaved African Americans just passively endured as if they were simply waiting for freedom to come from the outside. Ideas like this have been perpetuated and reflected in modern statements, such as when someone like Kanye West makes comments suggesting slavery was a choice. However, this perspective is not only inaccurate but also ignores the active resistance and struggle of enslaved people. In reality, enslaved African Americans resisted slavery in many ways. Some forms were resistant in everyday tasks like working slowly on purpose, breaking tools, or secretly trying to enjoy their lives by having the simplest, most basic interactions with the people they spent their lives with. Others tried to take direct action by attempting to leave slavery. For those who successfully escaped, resistance did not just end. Many men went on to actively fight against slavery and rescue their loved ones by joining the United States colored troops during the Civil War. These men were not just securing their own freedom, they wanted it for everyone like them. The 1831 rebellion, led by Nat Turner in the United States, shows that enslaved African Americans actively organized violent resistance against slavery, using rebellion as a strategy to challenge white control and claim their own freedom rather than waiting for legal emancipation. Enslaved African Americans lived under extremely harsh, dehumanizing conditions. Treated worse than the farm animals and regarded as property with no autonomy, they could be bought, sold, and separated from their families at any time. Enslaved people had little to no legal protection and were very often subject to extreme violence and punishment. Enslaved people, especially women, were vulnerable to abuse such as rape and public whippings and had no laws to protect them from these mistreatments. These conditions created a system of control that permeated every moment of life. Because of these conditions, resistance was not just an act of rebellion, it was a necessary response to oppression that kept their people down. African Americans understood their own humanity through generations of their ancestors, trying to preserve some semblance of what they once knew as culture. Through generations of people trying to reduce them to nothing but subservient minds, African Americans refused to accept a system that treated them as less than human. Resistance allowed them to assert some control, even if only in small ways. Also, driven by the knowledge that freedom was possible, the existence of free states in the North showed slavery was not inevitable. This encouraged many enslaved people to challenge the system and try to gain their freedom, which took many forms, especially during the years leading up and during the Civil War. One of the most direct forms of resistance was escape. Enslaved men, women, and children fled plantations and crossed into the free states. Many of those men who fled joined the United States colored troops. They fought in the war to defend their brothers and sisters still in bondage. It was common to do things like slow production down and cause trouble for the plantation as a whole, but sometimes resistance would be violent. One of the most significant examples of organized slave revolts was the 1831 rebellion led by Nat Turner. Turner was an enslaved preacher in Southampton County, Virginia. He was deeply religious and believed he was chosen for a higher purpose. Unlike the more normal forms of resistance, where it was more about getting you or yourself or your family free, Turner's actions reflected a highly intelligent plan to go after all of slavery, an organized rebellion against the system of slavery. His leadership and beliefs led him to coordinate one of the most well known uprisings in American history. The revolt began on Sunday, August 21st, 1831, in Southampton County, Virginia. He had a small group of enslaved people carry out planned uprising against local slaveholders. This rebellion was far from spontaneous. It was organized well in advance, with Turner and his followers coordinating their actions. The goal of the revolt was to challenge the system directly through violent resistance. Although the rebellion was eventually repressed, it remains as one of the most significant examples of intelligent, organized resistance during this period. Nat Turner's rebellion demonstrates that enslaved African Americans were not just waiting for someone to rescue them or end slavery for them, they were more than willing to fight for their humanity. It shows that they were more than capable of organizing intentional resistance. This revolt proves that enslaved could plan and coordinate actions aimed directly at challenging white control and the institution of slavery itself. Rather than waiting for an outside force to save them, Nat Turner believed God had chosen him to end slavery, so he took matters into his own hands. This rebellion had lasting effects by revealing the constant threat of resistance within the system of slavery and highlighting the determination of enslaved people to fight. Nat Turner's rebellion was by no means an isolated event, but part of a broader pattern of resistance among enslaved African Americans who knew that there was more to life than what they had been living. The desire for freedom was widespread and constant. Other figures like John Brown also became involved in violent resistance against slavery. Although John Brown was a white man, he had a similar experience to Nat Turner, a calling from God to end the institution of slavery. John Brown is a direct reflection of how deeply the conflict over slavery shaped America. The history of slavery in the United States overwhelmingly shows that enslaved African Americans did not just lie down and accept slavery. They actively revolted and did just about anything to have some level of autonomy. Figures like Nat Turner demonstrate that African Americans could plan intentional and direct resistance, and that enslaved people were capable of violent rebellion against the system that controlled them. Across the system of slavery, enslaved Africans continued to fight and find ways to claim their own freedom and assert their humanity. These actions reveal that the struggle for freedom was not something that was simply granted to them from the outside, but something that enslaved people actively fought for throughout their lives.